One of my favorite Dick Barnes stories, and we all love him. He bought a downtown bar called Hendrick's Regulator.
I just called it the Regulator. It was Hendrick's Brothers Saloon, and they had the regulator clock inside. It became known as the Regulator, and it was just a working man's tavern at the time.
He thought that maybe he could attract the university crowd and the School of Business faculty and all that stuff.
And that was about 3 years after I started Nick's. It became for sale. And I became interested in it. I thought, well, I could do it. I had a lot of enthusiasm.
And he said, but it wasn't really working. I'd advertised the Regulator and the Regulator. We had jazz on Friday afternoons and everything. He said, suddenly, he said, guys, I'm standing behind the bar, and it was a very small bar. There were 4 guys that came in on business suits. And Dick said, man, I think I've pretty much arrived. These guys are obviously recruiters that are, alumni from the business school. And so he said, I'm standing there, and the wait staff came over, and she said, what do you guys have? And the guy said, well, I'll have a beer, and go ahead and I'll have a beer, a weed or whatever it was. And one of the guys said, I'll have a Manhattan. And she said, we're out of mashed potatoes. And
true story.
And Dick said, my whole life flashed before my eyes because the looks said everything. Well, needless to say, the Regulator was a big success.
I was a district director of the Indiana Tavern Owners Association. And then every year they had a Tavern Owner of the Year. And I talked with some of the people. I said, well, how do you establish who would be eligible for Tavern Owner of the Year? And they explained and said, well, you have to show how much interest you put into the community, how much growth you can show, and you have to have a promotion, make sure you authenticate it with pictures and receipts and photographs and so forth. But I was the only one to ever win it from Indiana, and the only one ever to win it twice in the country. Those plaques that we have at Nick's still hanging. One's up by the front door, and there's a couple other duplicates up in the new Hoosier room upstairs. And my son Rex salvaged those out of somebody that had bought them at a garage sale or something like that.
Was there stuff hanging on the walls when you got?
Not very much. In fact, John Cartwright was very instrumental in that. We were hanging up posters and things like that, IU memorabilia. He and I started that initially in the original front room of Nick's. And the barn wood all came from, and they were getting ready to build Lake Monroe. They were tearing down old farm barns where the bottom of Lake Monroe is now. It used to be all farmland. And so a friend of mine, that he had started accumulating the barn siding and had it stacked, when the barns were being torn down. And I started thinking about that. And I thought, boy, that'd be a great thing to have as decor, old, make it look authentic and old.
When I came back to graduate school in '66, the manager was a guy named Fred Stewart. So Fred hired me because I attended bar up in Chicago, and they were going to get a liquor license. They didn't have one at the time. They just had beer and wine, and they got their liquor license in December of that year.
There was a liquor board at the time, the four-member board, and one of the members of the board was a traveling representative from the state of Indiana, and for some reason he took a disliking to me, or he thought I was cocky, and I said, well, you have to get that renewed every year, and I'd like to apply for a liquor permit, whiskey liquor, in addition to a beer permit. And he says, well, as long as I'm around, you're never going to get it. He just thought he didn't like me. And I knew then, I said, boy, that's the wrong thing to say. Probably illegal on his part to say you can't have it, because that's granted by the state of Indiana, not an individual. So I finally got that. Bud Ferris from Ferris Market, I went to him, I told him the story, and he said, well, we'll talk to somebody about that. We'll talk to the mayor, we'll talk to somebody of stature. And we got it done. Thanks to Bud.
Yeah.
Well, Bud Ferris was a legend here because, I mean, he came in every day for lunch. I mean, every day. Even when the food was not really good, he came in every day. But he was a great, loyal guy, but we did a lot of business with him. They've been our meat supplier since, I think, Mr. Barnes was at Cafe Pizzeria, and they always supplied our Nick's Burgers.
Went to Bud and I said, I want to serve the best hamburger I can. So let's get together and use Ferris meat for our hamburgers at Nick's.
Bud Ferris, he's sort of the godfather of this group. He started this table, so still feel like you can always have lunch with Bud by coming to the table.
Bud started coming down here to Nick's and brought the game of Honest John along with him. The concept of it was to take a matchbook, like I'm holding right here, and the loser of the previous day could write down any one of 26 letters in the matchbook. The person who writes it down seals it and puts it on the ketchup bottle, and at that point he picks someone to pick the starter, and that individual could start on any letter in the alphabet.
Mikey.
And it would go all the way around until whoever wrote it down says that that letter landed on that particular person. That individual gets the honor and privilege of buying everybody's lunch, including the tip, which is also predetermined at $1.50 per person right now. Because of inflation, it used to be 25 cents, 50, 75, $1. Now it's $1.50 per person on top of it. The first time that you are at the table, you're somebody's guest, so you're not expected to pay the first time. And when somebody takes you as a guest, if it lands on you, then your sponsor pays on your behalf. But after the first time when you come back, you're on your own after that.
I started coming to the table in 1994. I used to work with Bill Morrow, who was a longtime participant before he passed away, and I worked with his agency. So he brought me to the table, and the table's somewhat contagious because it's a good group of men, and occasionally we have some women guests.
I think they represent a cross-section about people that are retired, people that have sold their business, and a lot of business people. Some come often, some don't. Usually at Christmas time we have a bunch of people, maybe 20 or 25 people.
We had, I think for 7 or 8 years, Debbie Burton was our waitress, and she still comes in to this day and visits with us on occasion. And sometimes when we have our Christmas dinner, she'll come in for the Christmas dinner, and she was just a special person and did a wonderful job. It's enjoyable to have a group of friends that you always know on any day that if you want to have lunch with somebody, you can always find somebody at Nick's